The Honeymoon Incident. Shortly before the start of the pandemic, much to the surprise of my friends and family and against all odds, I got married to a very lovely woman. Since my wife speaks excellent but not quite fluent French, I suggested we take our honeymoon in France, as this meant I would have an excuse to not have to talk to anyone the entire trip. We arrived in France, picked up a little red Peugeot, and proceeded to try and eat our way across the country. We quickly realized that my wife, who learned to drive in a city notorious for its aggressive drivers, was much better at driving on unfamiliar roads than I was, whose driving style could charitably be described as timid and terrified and quiet. We also quickly realized that I was much better at reading maps and navigating, so we fell into a comfortable routine where my wife would drive as I directed her from patisserie to patisserie. About halfway through our trip, we were driving down a tiny countryside road. My wife insisted we were lost, while I insisted that was impossible since I was navigating. We were just taking a very scenic route. That happened to loop back on itself several times. There was nothing but vineyards, cypress trees, and clear blue skies as far as the eye could see. Okay, in a couple kilometers we're going to come to the town of T something, where we're going to take a right towards the town of. Well, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. Why did the French insist X as a silent letter again? Maybe it wasn't the best idea to have the guy who can't speak French do the navigating, but we survived. A few hundred feet farther down the country road, we came around a bend to a T intersection, where an even smaller lane met the road, heading to the left. There was also a police officer standing in the middle of the road, waving us down. Behind him were two cars parked across the road with their lights on, flares and reflector panels, the whole 9 yards. The road was definitely closed. As we pulled up to the intersection, the police officer began to walk up to our car. The man was drop-dead gorgeous. Perfect Mediterranean tan, thick head of flowing black hair, just enough stubble to accent his perfectly chiseled jawline, with arms the size of my thighs and wearing a black shirt that your average 6-year-old would struggle to fit into. He leaned into the driver's side window, pointed down the lane to the left and said, verbatim, "Oh, I thought, the road ahead is closed, so they want us to take a detour down this lane." But my wife was still staring at the police officer. Her French was good, but it did sometimes take her a second to formulate what she wanted to say, so I figured it must have been more complicated than I thought and she needed to ask a question. A couple seconds later, my wife musters all of her interlingual eloquence to reply, "Wow, I think it must be really complicated if she didn't catch it the first time." So Officer Gorgeous repeats himself, pointing down the lane more vigorously for emphasis. My wife stares at him for a couple more seconds. You can see the gears turning in her head. She is obviously preparing a detailed and cogent response. At this point, I lean over and say, "Honey, the road is closed. There's a detour, and he wants us to go that way instead and quat." My wife stares at Officer Gorgeous for a few more seconds, turns to me, shakes herself until her eyes can focus on me, and slowly turns the car down the lane. "But you don't speak French. How did you understand that there was a detour ? And quat. And that's the story of how my wife made goo-goo eyes at a French police officer in front of me on our honeymoon.